2013 meeting to order, and I'll ask you all to stand and recite with me the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands,
one
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Steve, call roll, please.
Yes, sir. Benberry, Crecilius,
here.
Morrison,
Here.
Schramke,
Here.
Shadle,
Here.
Wade,
Here.
Chairman Manchester.
Here, Kathy, you have the minutes motion.
Yes, sir. I move that the reading of the minutes for October 7th, 2013 be waived, and that the minutes of said meeting as prepared by the Secretary be approved as written.
Second.
Seconded by Schramke. Any discussion? Call roll, please.
Yes, sir. Crecilius,
Aye.
Morrison,
Aye.
Schramke,
Aye.
Shadle,
Aye.
Wade,
Aye.
Chairman Manchester.
Aye. John, you have number one, the application of Robert and Phyllis Jones for waiver.
Yes. I move that this commission receive and file the application of Robert and Phyllis Jones in Western Kentucky Insurance Agency, Inc. for the proposed re-subdivision of property located at 2300 Beltline Highway and 2301 Ohio Street. I further move that the requested approval be given in compliance with all other applicable provisions of the Paducah subdivision ordinance be waived.
Second.
Seconded by Crecilius. Discussion. Have any questions?
The applicant's representative is here if there are any questions.
Do you have any comments, Steve?
No. There was a corrected plat. The corrections that, yeah, and those things have been corrected.
And you decided this was the original property of
I remember is it Bob's.
Bob's.
Bob. Bob's. It was not
I don't
this
remember.
Bob.
Yeah, not that one either.
Goes back.
Call roll.
Yes, sir. Shadle,
Aye.
Wade,
Aye.
Crecilius,
Aye.
Morrison,
Aye.
Schramke,
Aye.
Chairman Manchester.
Aye. Ms. Schramke, you have number two, the text amendment. Public
move.
hearing.
I move that a resolution entitled, "A Resolution Constituting the Final Report of the Paducah Planning Commission on the Proposed Text Amendment of the Paducah Zoning Ordinance by amending Section 126-106, Convenience and Service Zone B1, be adopted."
Second.
Seconded by Shadle. Steve, are you going to be our presenter tonight?
Yes, I am, sir, and I have a PowerPoint presentation if I can take you through the changes.
All right, sir.
Come on over.
I'm going to highlight the text changes. There's quite a few of them in there, but the more important ones are the ones I'm going to highlight during this this presentation. The first thing that we wanted to do is really this. First of all, I guess this is really, in some senses, also cleaning up our zoning ordinances. We usually keep a list of things that need to be cleaned up within the ordinance, and when something comes along, we attach those little ones to the larger text amendments, which we'll talk about in a second. This is a perfect example right here. Currently, within the zoning regulations, there's parking requirements of 1 per room plus 1 per additional GFA. Hotel, motel, for proposed, 1 per room plus 1 per additional GFA of ballrooms, banquet rooms, meeting rooms, and similar spaces. And the purpose of this is the 100 square feet of gross floor area is not defined, thereby creating confusion when the hotel site plans are submitted. This clarifies that. Why this is important is sometimes we have engineers that are in other cities, for instance, that may be preparing the site development plan. This clarifies it up front, so in case they don't call us, they know exactly what that 100 square feet pertains to. So it's just trying to help the engineers out. The next one is very similar. The zoning ordinance actually reads quick style 1 per 30 GFA. We're wanting to define that by saying 1 per 30 GFA of the public dining area. And the purpose of this is the gross floor area is considered by staff to be customer side of the counter. That's the public area. Staff has typically used this calculation when determining parking needs for quick style restaurants. This helps the developers from overbuilding unnecessary parking areas. An example of that, if an engineer would look at our zoning regulations and they would see, let's say, a 4,000 square foot building and it says 1 per 30 GFA, they may put parking in for the 130 for the entire building as part of their design. This clarifies it up front that no, it's just the public area that you have to calculate into the 1 per 30 GFA. Yes, ma'am.
Can I break your train of thought there for a minute?
Absolutely.
I just want to make sure I understand this. So previously it was figured on the whole square footage of the facility. Now it's just the dining area.
It's always been just the dining area. That was an interpretation that I made that I would forward on to the engineer when they called. This actually codifies it, so up front they understand that it's only the public area. It's always been,
About the staff that's,
What about parking for employees?
it's all included as part of it. For the last 15, 20 years or so, it's always been just the public area. We've never had calculations for the entire structure. This just clarifies it.
Is that kind of standard across the state? And
Yeah. And of course, this is just quick style restaurants, for instance, that you see that with the drive-throughs. The other restaurants that have more sit down where you have a waiter come and wait on you, that is a separate calculation of 1 per 3 seats. So this is just sit down. It's going to be no change from our current interpretation of the zoning regulations as they are now. It's just codified. The next few sections are dealing with American Disabilities Act. Currently, handicap parking is 16 by 20. And what we're trying to do as proposed is to make it 16 by 18 and 13 by 18, and then also look at some van accessible requirements. The reason for that is our parking requirements for regular parking spaces right now are 10 or 9 by 18. So in keeping that at 20 feet, what you get is 2 feet hanging out into the parking aisle. So we're actually bringing this in line with the rest of our parking requirements.
has anyone reviewed that? Handicap parking has become a statewide issue. The number of permits being issued now, and I recognize there's problems with people misusing them, but there are a larger number in our population that require handicap parking, and I don't know how old these requirements are or if they're looked at or.
Well, and you'll see the next amendment that's coming up is actually we're doing an amendment to the number required as part of our site development review process. When the engineer submits that site plan, that's one of the things that we review is to make sure their handicap accessibility is in compliance with not only local regulations, but also the American Disabilities Act on the number and the sizes. For instance, you're supposed to have a van accessible space as part of your overall handicap accessible package. So what I'm doing right now is actually bring in our regulations to make sure they're in compliance with the state and federal requirements.
Thank you.
This just shows our existing, what we require right now within the zoning ordinance, and you'll see that it stops at 200 parking spaces. We would then expand it upon that to come into compliance.
Is that in the vernacular stalls, S-T-A-L-L-S, handicap stalls?
Stalls, yeah.
Why don't they just call them spaces instead of stalls?
Good question, sir.
A horse or something.
That will be with the next text amendment that we, or we can make that change now. I mean,
I just wondered if that was the lingo that you all use. It's a carryover.
yeah, it's a carryover. As I mentioned, this is just bringing in compliance with the federal law. The next few sections are cleaning up some of the sign regulations. These two right here are just getting rid of some of the verbiage that doesn't apply to the Code of Ordinances anymore. And this just describes those sections. For instance, 985 was repealed in 2005, just cleaning it up. Under 126.76, we're proposing to amend as follows. Bulletin boards, and we're adding an identification signs shall be permitted at places of worship, provided such identification signs or bulletin boards do not exceed 48 square feet in area per sign face. One freestanding identification sign is permitted per lot. However, one additional freestanding identification shall be permitted for places of worship on the intersection of two streets or has double frontage or parallel streets. And then we're changing it from 8 feet to 10 feet in height. We're just basically clarifying that section of what is allowed. The identification signs are entrance, exit signs, those types of signage for a church. The 5 feet from 7 feet are initial sign regulations that were passed some 8-10 years ago, had it at 7 feet back. The Planning Commission some years back changed it to 5, which I think was the right thing to do. We're just bringing that into compliance. And then you'll see the 10 feet in height changed from 8. We're doing that because typically across the board, 10 feet is the maximum height even for schools. So we're just trying to bring everything into compliance and just make sure everything's somewhat the same. This is one of our larger amendments and one of the reasons that we brought all these to you tonight, and it's changing sign regulations for places of worship. What we're proposing on, I'll go ahead and read through this if you'd like. Places of worship may have one electronic message sign in lieu of one identification sign, provided the following requirements are met. Such sign shall not exceed 48 square feet in area per sign face. Such sign may not exceed 10 feet in height. Such sign shall meet the requirements provided in 126.76K5, and that's the electronic message sign requirements. Such sign shall be located at least 200 feet away from any residential structure in the R1, R2, R3, and R4 zone. Just an example, a lot of your city blocks are 300 to 330 feet. 200 feet is about 2/3 of that, very similar to a football field, 2/3. Except for pastor residences, parishes, and caretaker dwellings which are owned by the place of worship. The 200 feet measurement includes residential structures on the opposite sides of public ways, streets. Said measurement shall be taken from the nearest outside wall of the structure. Further, such signs shall not be closer than 5 feet to any property line unless attached to a building. Each sign shall be located on the same lot as the principal building or the church. Only one electronic message sign, either freestanding or attached to a building, shall be permitted per place of worship. And why are we doing this? The zoning text amendment is to provide regulations for churches to have electronic message signs provided certain requirements are met. These regulations are meant to protect residential neighborhoods while allowing churches with larger lots to have electronic message signs. Schools and residential zones are currently allowed to have electronic message signs. The RLUIPA that you see down there, that's the Religious Land Use Institution Act. That was taken into consideration when we did this also. And the RLUIPA, generally what it does is provide some protection to churches that other organizations or businesses within the community would be allowed to do it. The 200-foot rule, or we looked at that from a staff level, what churches within our community would be allowed to utilize the electronic message sign and try not to have a negative impact on adjacent residential lots. And if you'd like, I'll stop at that one for a second, or would you like me to continue on, or do you have questions about that? An example of where this may be allowed is there's several churches on Broadway up towards Call Park. That's an example. No immediate adjacent residential areas. There's a park on one side. It's actually Kyler Park, I think. There's banks and churches across the street. In this instance, those churches would be allowed to apply for an electronic message sign with the new text regulations that are being put in place. A lot of churches in residential areas, just in residential neighborhoods, may not be able to because of the proximity of houses. The second big part of this is changing the convenience and service zone. Currently, there's a permitted use list, just like all zones in the city. The following uses provided they are conducted wholly within a building except for off-street loading and unloading. Retail establishments are principally permitted. that covers about everything. I mean, any type of sales of goods is considered retail sales. So that's across the board. You're allowed to have a business in the B1 zone. Also, personal and convenience service establishments, shoe stores and repair shops, tailor shop, theater, and variety store. That's the existing principal permitted use in the B1 zone. We are planning on doing a couple of amendments. The first is take out store and, meaning shoe store. Shoe stores are retail. We don't really need to have that. It's somewhat redundant. So we just put shoe repair shop. And then also we took out variety store. Variety store is old. Retail stores take care of that also. The second section is after you get through your principal permitted uses, there's another set of uses that are allowed with Planning Commission approval, and I'll read it the way it is right now. It says the following uses are permitted as approved by the Commission, meaning the Planning Commission, based on the conditions necessary to protect the character of the zone. There's service stations, which really nowadays we don't see a lot of anymore. Gas stations nowadays are considered retail uses. Service stations where you went in and you had your vehicle worked on. Had drive-in establishments. Other similar but undefined uses. So that could be actually a lot of different things. And then number 2, it says the Commission shall determine that the above uses will not be detrimental to adjacent residential property via excessive noise, light, odor, or vibration. Design of the structure shall be compatible with the adjacent areas and undue traffic congestion will not occur. That's the way it reads right now. What we're planning on doing is as you see, number 2, adding conditional permitted uses, and then striking the way it is right now, and then adding the Board of Adjustment shall determine that the listed uses will not be detrimental to adjacent residential property by excessive noise, light, odor, like it is now, traffic congestion, or vibration, and then actually listing 3 uses: automobile, rental, sales, or service. Remember, it did say automobile service. We've added rental and sales. Drive-in establishments, and then other similar but undefined uses. So A, B, and C are the same as they were before, except we've added rental and sales to that. Also, the way it is right now, if someone's not on that principal permitted use list, they can come to the Planning Commission and ask for permission as a similar permitted use. What this does is change it to a conditional permitted use. What that means is there's a public hearing as part of that process. If they're a similar but undefined use, or let's say a automobile sales business, first of all, they would have to make an application, and it would come before the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission would review the proposed use and make a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment would hold a public hearing, and at that public hearing would render a decision. This also, the conditional use list also allows the Board of Adjustment to attach conditions to it. For instance, let's say a car rental or sales or service place was approved. They could say, we're approving it, but because it's it's on a major arterial, but it's coming into a neighborhood, we're going to attach a condition of that your lights be no taller than 14 feet because you're adjacent to a residential. Or we're going to attach a condition that besides the typical screening that may be required by zoning, we want the screening to be a little bit taller at the rear of the structure to protect any adjacent residential areas. So the Board of Adjustment has that authority through the conditional use permit process to make those recommendations. Of course, a recommendation from the Planning Commission for conditions can happen also. The purpose of the zoning text amendment is to provide conditional uses, and I think I've gone through the rest of that. Would you like me to go back to that process and answer any questions?
Congestion is being added, is that correct?
Yeah, undue traffic congestion. In other words, it may be all right, but one of the things the Planning Commission, the Board of Adjustment look at is if we're going to put in a drive-in establishment. We already know restaurants are allowed principally in the B1 zone. You can put a restaurant in there, but let's say you want a drive-in establishment and it causes a lot more traffic. That's something that the Planning Commission, the BOA, may want to take a look at. May want to consider as part of the approval process. So yes, traffic congestion is one thing that would be looked at, as well as the noise, light, odor. And that's generally highlights most of the text changes, and I'd be certainly happy to answer any of your questions.
This is all new to me. How often do you go through this process of just whenever you have a major change and then you?
There's probably several times a year we do text amendments. A lot of times text amendments, it's hard to write a zoning ordinance that encompasses all the different types of land uses and land use changes within our community. So sometimes somebody will ask something or request something that when you start looking at the zoning ordinance, it doesn't fit into the zoning ordinance. So we'll have to come back and do a text amendment to make that fit. At that time, usually I have an ongoing list of the little things that have bothered me, and I'll attach those on there, just make sure they're cleaned up.
This is a housekeeping amendment, in other words.
Some of them are, yes.
And if I understand what you just said, for instance, if a situation should arise that there's interest in a certain property or something and it doesn't fall under some guideline, these types of changes then could be addressed and looked at and see if they are up to date, et cetera. And at that time, you might adjust that portion of it, correct?
Certainly.
Is there any danger of say a church located in a neighborhood already violating this?
No. At this time, I don't think there are any churches that have, maybe in a business zone. Churches and business zones are allowed to have electronic mesh signs, but not in residential. I know there's several schools, I think on 28th Street, they have an electronic mesh sign.
They're popular, so
Yeah.
they're kind of.
And the 200 feet is something that was staff initiated and thought about. I mean, certainly there are some churches within residential areas. Churches are allowed in any zone in the city because the zoning ordinance thinks that they're obviously needed in communities. They serve the neighborhoods. So it gets that weighing of what is acceptable when you start talking about electronic message or lighted signs. Certainly you want to protect the character of residential areas also. So that 200 feet, we thought as staff, would be somewhat of a compromise to allow them, but also protect some of the residential property rights of a person right next door.
And this might be, I might have not have thought this through, so you certainly can correct me.
Yes, ma'am.
So this would be a better procedure than if you had a piece of property that was Zone B1 to change the zoning to commercial? I mean,
I'm not following your question.
if you had an interest in a piece of property that was B1 and it did not fall, it was a whatever, service station.
Mhm.
Okay, and so therefore it now, or it, I don't know, it was something, but it was not one of the approved.
Mhm.
But it's on a major thoroughfare. Could they not request zoning be changed?
Absolutely. If someone was to come in and there was not a specific way for them to get approvals to do what they wanted to in the B1 zone, they could certainly apply to the Planning Commission for, let's say, a B3 zone. But you can't do conditional zoning. So if it was rezoned to B3,
Forever.
it'd be B3 forever, and all the wholesale distribution uses that go with B3 zoning. This is a way to keep the a little bit more restrictive zoning, but allow somebody the ability to come before a board and request approval with the possibility of conditions
I
attached.
understand. Okay.
Any other questions? David, this is not the first time we've talked about signs,
Yes,
or
I'm sure it's not.
it seems to be a recurring.
I wonder when they're going to become a distraction to drivers. They're
Already
getting
are a
almost to that point. It's,
They really are.
yeah. If texting is a distraction, I don't know.
Doesn't bother
You know, as billboards for a long time. Years ago, as billboards. Now it's electronic signs. All right. Now, this motion that has been made and seconded is for a text amendment of sections 126-71, 76, and 106, which is off-street parking and loading, sign regulations, convenience and service zones. And an affirmative vote will be by aye and a negative vote by no. Are there any other questions that you all want to raise or comments you want to make before we call for a vote? Steve?
I think there's three different motions, actually. The first one that was done was was it B1 that was read?
Well, I'm just looking at this agenda for tonight, and that's all together.
Yeah, and I probably should have broken that up. We actually had three different resolutions
All right, what's the one that,
and three different motions.
Lorraine, which one did you read?
I read
It's not the one.
one that I've now put here.
It'll show the section.
Final report.
B1, yeah.
Yeah.
After that one,
B1.
I'll need these two also done because we're dealing with different sections of the zoning
Right.
I was wondering.
All right, you read
B1.
B1.
B1, 126, 106.
Yes, sir.
Bob, would you take,
That makes more sense. I was confused how we were voting the whole thing at once.
we'll vote now on the text amendment for 126-106 convenience and service zone B1. Y'all understand we're just voting on one of the three things that, okay. Call roll, please, on the first one.
Schramke,
Aye.
Shadle,
Aye.
Wade,
Aye.
Crecilius,
Aye.
Morrison,
Aye.
Chairman Manchester.
Aye. All right. David, which one do you have? Now, I hand you, it was
You should have the sign.
126-76, or
12676, yes, sir.
would you read that,
Be
please?
glad to. I move that a resolution entitled, "A Resolution Constituting the Final Report of the Paducah Planning Commission on the Proposed Text Amendment of the Paducah Zoning Ordinance by amending Section 126-76 Sign Regulations," be adopted.
Second.
Seconded by Schramke. Discussion. No, I'm looking for when it becomes effective. One of them said it'll come effective
I see.
January. I'll find it in a second.
Okay.
Well, now, let's not slow it down because of that. I can take this up with Steve. Any other questions or comments about it? I'll roll then.
Thank you, sir. Morrison,
Aye.
Schramke,
Aye.
Shadle,
Aye.
Wade,
Aye.
Crecilius,
Aye.
Chairman Manchester.
Aye. Bob, you have the last motion, which,
Mr. Chairman, I move that a resolution entitled, "A Resolution Constituting the Final Report of the Paducah Planning Commission on the Proposed Text Amendment of the Paducah Zoning Ordinance by amending Section 126-71 Off-Street Parking and Loading Areas," be adopted.
Second.
second by Shadle. Discussion. No questions? Call roll, please.
Wade,
Aye.
Crecilius,
Aye.
Morrison,
Aye.
Schramke,
Aye.
Shadle,
Aye.
Chairman Manchester.
Aye. Reason I was looking for the date, Steve, I've noticed in what it is, it's the sign regulations 76, and it said it became effective January 1, 2003.
Yeah.
And that was the original motion that was in there. And we're not changing that at all, it just referred to it. Thank you. I think I was going crazy. Okay, any other business? There being none, thank you all.
You.
Nice presentation.